Rachel never thought her life would turn into a real soap opera. Before marriage, everything seemed so clear and predictable. She worked as an accountant at a small company, dreamed of a happy family, and believed she had met the perfect man. John courted her beautifully: flowers, restaurants, kind words. His confidence and ambition were magnetic, and his promises of a happy future seemed so sincere. When he proposed, Rachel didn't hesitate for a second. They got married 6 months after they met. And for the first while, everything was just as she had dreamed. Problems started when Miranda, John's mother, entered their lives. She had a character strong enough to ensure a career as a military general. A tall woman, always impeccably dressed, with cold eyes and pursed lips. From day one, she made it clear to Rachel that she didn't measure up to her son. "John deserves better," she would often repeat, looking Rachel up and down. Every visit from her mother-in-law turned into an inspection, where Rachel inevitably failed all the tests, from how to fold towels to the recipe for borscht. John would just brush it off. "Mom is just worried. Don't take it personally." When Rachel found out she was pregnant, she hoped the arrival of a grandson would soften her mother-in-law. For a while, it even seemed like things were improving. Miranda became interested in choosing a name and buying baby items, never missing an opportunity to emphasize that the child was a perfect copy of their family, a true Lopez. Rachel silently agreed, hoping for a truce for the sake of the future baby. The pregnancy was difficult, with morning sickness and constant exhaustion. But Rachel tried not to complain, afraid of more remarks like, "Some women gave birth in the fields and then went straight back to work." The birth of Rick turned their life upside down. The tiny little person with a loud voice demanded attention around the clock. Rachel barely slept, hardly found time to eat, but was happy holding her son. At first, John was moved, taking photos, bragging to his friends, but quickly grew tired of sleepless nights and the baby's crying. His excitement turned into irritation and then estrangement. He spent more and more time at work, and when at home, buried himself in his phone, ignoring the needs of his wife and son. "I make the money, that's my main concern," he would reply to Rachel's rare reproaches. Miranda started coming more often. She would come to help, but her help usually boiled down to criticizing Rachel's parenting methods and telling stories about how well she had raised her own John. "Your milk is wrong, that's why he's crying. You're spoiling him with all your constant rocking. In our family, children have always been strong. It's your genetics that are letting you down." Each of these comments hurt Rachel, but she stayed silent, not wanting to create conflict. Besides, sometimes her mother-in-law would actually babysit, giving Rachel a chance to take a shower or quickly run to the store. The first truly alarming signs came when Rick turned 3 months old. John began calling his mother more often, discussing something in low voices. The conversation stopped as soon as Rachel entered the room. One day, overhearing a snippet of a conversation about some money, she asked her husband directly. "Stay out of it," he snapped, raising his voice at her for the first time. "Take care of the baby, that's your job now." In that moment, Rachel felt something crack between them, like an invisible wall had risen in their home, separating once close people. And with each passing day, that wall grew higher and stronger. The family's financial situation began to deteriorate after the baby arrived. John's salary, which had been enough for the two of them before, now barely covered the growing expenses: diapers, formula, medicines. It all cost money. Rachel tried to save. She stopped buying new clothes for herself, searched for discounts on baby products. But the money kept slipping away like water through her fingers. John, instead of tightening his belt, continued to spend on his own needs as before: a new smartphone, expensive cologne, lunches at restaurants with colleagues. Any hint of saving was met with resistance. "I won't let you turn me into a beggar," he said one day when Rachel cautiously suggested temporarily canceling their subscription to a sports channel. That phrase struck her. Is the image of a successful man more important to him than the real needs of the family? That night, she lay awake for a long time, listening to the even breathing of her husband, who seemed to feel no guilt whatsoever. A small ray of light came with the news that maternity benefits would soon be paid. Rachel had already mentally allocated that money, part for paying off the loan for the fridge, part for winter clothes for Rick, and the remainder for an emergency fund for illnesses and unexpected expenses. When the money appeared in her account, she felt some relief. Now, at least for a while, she could stop counting every penny. Did the maternity benefits come? John asked casually that evening, peering over her shoulder at her phone. Rachel nodded, not paying much attention to his sudden interest. "Great, send me half," he said in a tone that left no room for disagreement. "I need to pay off the credit card debt." Rachel was taken aback. "But we agreed that this money would go for the baby and to pay off our joint loan." John just waved it off. "Don't dramatize. My debt is your debt too. Besides, I'm the head of the family, and I know better how to manage the money." That same evening, Miranda called. She was unusually sweet and even asked about her daughter-in-law's health, which rarely happened. "Is John home?" "Hand him the phone, dear," she cooed in a honeyed voice. John, taking the phone, immediately went out onto the balcony. Through the closed door, Rachel could only hear snippets of conversation. "Yes, Mom. Of course. I'll sort it out on Friday. The tickets." From that day on, John changed. He became unexpectedly attentive to Rachel, even washing the dishes a couple of times and taking Rick for a walk. In another time, she would have been happy with such changes, but now, this sudden shift in behavior only heightened her anxiety. What especially raised alarms were the increasing visits from Miranda, who had suddenly become the epitome of friendliness. "Rachel, you're so worn out with the baby. You need to rest, recharge your strength," she said, stroking her daughter-in-law's shoulder. "Motherhood is such hard work. Not every woman can handle it." One day, while putting Rick to bed, Rachel overheard her mother-in-law talking to her son. "You deserve a proper rest. This mood of yours doesn't suit you. We need to get away, recharge." John mumbled something unintelligible and then added louder, "Let's not do this now. Rachel might hear." A chill ran down Rachel's spine. What were they planning behind her back? The answer came a few days later when Rachel, searching for a recipe she had recently opened, checked the browser history. She stumbled upon a hotel booking website. The page was closed, but the history clearly showed booking confirmed. Hotel Antalya. 2 adults. Rachel checked their joint account. A significant sum had been withdrawn 2 days ago, an amount suspiciously close to part of her maternity benefits. That evening, Rachel tried to gather her thoughts. Maybe she had misunderstood everything? Perhaps John was planning a surprise family vacation for them? But deep down, she already knew the truth. And when her husband returned from work, unusually cheerful and lively, she felt a tightening in her chest as the conversation she had been dreading approached. "We need to talk," Rachel said. As soon as John crossed the threshold, she tried to speak calmly, though her insides were trembling with tension. Rick was already asleep, and the silence in the apartment made every word feel heavy, significant. John seemed to have been expecting this conversation. His face quickly adopted a guilty expression, which he immediately tried to mask with a false sense of confidence. "I found a booking for a hotel in Mexico. Are you going to explain?" Rachel looked straight into his eyes, trying to catch even a glimpse of remorse. John remained silent for a few seconds, as if deciding which version of the truth to choose. Then he sighed and raised his hands, as if saying, "You caught me. Yes, I was going to tell you tomorrow. You see, I need this vacation. I'm exhausted from work, from the constant baby crying, sleepless nights. I need to recharge so I can keep supporting the family." He spoke quickly, clearly having prepared this speech in advance. "Mom is coming with me. She's been wanting a vacation for a long time, and it'll be good for me to have someone to talk to." Rachel couldn't believe her ears. "So, you and your mom are going to a 5-star hotel while I'm sitting here alone with a 3-month-old baby? And on whose money, I wonder?" Her voice betrayed her, quivering with the hurt she had been trying to hide. "Don't dramatize, it's just a week. You'll manage somehow," John went on the offensive. A typical tactic of his when he ran out of arguments. "And the money? Yeah, I took part of your maternity benefits, but it's the family budget. What's the difference between my money and yours? Besides, it's an investment in my mental health. I'll come back refreshed, work better, earn more, everyone will benefit. This is not a family budget, this is money for the child. We were supposed to pay off the loan, buy winter clothes for Rick." Rachel felt her anger pushing the hurt aside. "Do you even understand that you're leaving us with almost no money? What if Rick gets sick? What if, enough?" John slammed his fist on the table, causing the cup next to it to jump. "I've made my decision, and that's it. The tickets are bought, the hotel is paid for, the money is spent, and no amount of hysterics will bring it back. Mom is right, you need to learn to cope on your own, instead of constantly depending on me. What does your mom have to do with this?" Rachel felt a lump form in her throat. "Did she come up with all of this?" "Yes, she's the one who turned you against your own family. Don't bring my mom into this." John exploded. "At least she understands my needs, unlike you. Do you think it's easy to work all day, then come home to a house where the kid is always crying and the wife walks around in a filthy bathrobe? I have a right to rest, and I will get it, whether you like it or not." At that moment, Rick woke up and started crying, disturbed by the loud voices. Rachel rushed to the crib, feeling tears streaming down her face. John exhaled in irritation. "Here we go again. I'm going to my mom's. At least I can get some sleep there. I'll come back tomorrow to get my things." The front door slammed shut, and Rachel was left alone, rocking her crying son and trying to make sense of what had just happened. The next day, John did come back, but only to pack his suitcase. He was cold and businesslike, avoiding looking his wife in the eyes. "We're leaving tomorrow morning. The flight is at 6 o'clock, he said, stuffing things into his duffel bag. "I'll be back in a week. There's still money on the card, it should be enough." "John, please, let's talk." Rachel made one last attempt to reach her husband. "Think about what you're doing. You're abandoning us, leaving. With almost all the money. This is betrayal. You can't do this to your family. You can't do this to your family." He turned around, and in his eyes, Rachel saw something unfamiliar, something alien. "What about the fact that after the baby was born, you completely forgot about your husband? Now I'm just a wallet and a helper around the house, is that okay with you?" "You know it's only temporary." Rachel felt the conversation was futile, but she continued with all her might. "Rick is still so small, he needs attention. But he'll grow up, it will get easier, and we can." "I don't want to discuss this anymore," John interrupted her, zipping up his suitcase. "The decision is made. Do me a favor, don't ruin my vacation with your calls and messages. You're a grown woman, you'll manage. He left without saying goodbye to either her or their son. In the doorway, he bumped into the neighbor, who looked at the suitcase in surprise, but he only forced a smile at her and mumbled something about a business trip. Rachel stood in the middle of the room, feeling an odd emptiness inside. The maternity money she had been counting on was gone. Her husband had betrayed her. Her mother-in-law was evidently thrilled with the situation. And she was left alone, with a small child in her arms and almost no money. In the evening, Rachel received a message from John, a photo of him with his mother at the airport, smiling with glasses of something in their hands. The caption read, "Hooray, the vacation has begun. Don't miss us too much." Rachel stared at the photo for a long time, feeling something inside her finally break. This was no longer just a conflict, no temporary misunderstanding. This was real betrayal, conscious, cruel, committed by the closest person. And she had no intention of forgiving it. The first night alone was the hardest. Rachel paced the apartment, trying to calm Rick, who seemed to feel his mother's tension and cried incessantly. When the baby finally fell asleep, she collapsed onto the couch, exhausted, and cried quietly, so as not to wake him. The tears flowed, washing away the shock, the hurt, the confusion. And when they stopped, only cold, crystal-clear rage remained. "No, I won't be a victim," she whispered, looking at the sleeping Rick. "I won't let them treat us like this." In the morning, gathering the remnants of her strength, Rachel began methodically searching the apartment for important documents, bank statements, anything that could give her an advantage in this situation. In an old folder with papers, she found something interesting, the sales contract for John's car. The battered Toyota, which he had bought before they even met, was not registered in his name but in Rachel's. She vaguely remembered the day when she signed the papers. John had explained that it was more convenient for taxes, and she, not really paying attention, had signed the documents. Now, rereading the contract, Rachel remembered another detail. John had had some problems with loans. He was afraid that the bailiffs might seize his property, so he registered the car in his future wife's name. "Legally, this is my car," Rachel said slowly, feeling a plan forming in her mind. "He can fly off with my money, but I can manage my property." She took out her phone and dialed her friend Linda's number. Linda worked as a lawyer and always gave good advice. "Hi, Linda. Sorry for the early call. Yes, everything's fine with Rick. But I need to talk." Rachel briefly outlined the situation, trying to speak matter-of-factly and dryly, so she wouldn't start crying again. "What a jerk," Linda exclaimed. "So what are you planning to do now?" "I have the car documents. It's registered in my name. Tell me, can I sell it without his consent?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Linda spoke slowly. "Technically, yes. If you're listed as the owner in the documents, you have full legal right to dispose of the car. But are you sure you want to do this?" "When he comes back, it'll be too late," Rachel replied firmly. "I'm not going to sit here and wait while he and his mommy blow through my maternity money. I need money for the baby, for our life." "Then I'm with you," Linda said resolutely. "I'll come over in an hour, we'll go through the documents together. And by the way, I know a good dealership that buys used cars. My brother sold his there recently." An hour later, Rachel and Linda were sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through the documents and estimating the car's value. The Toyota wasn't new, but it was in good condition and could fetch a decent price, possibly more than John had spent on their trip to Mexico. "Can you imagine his face when he comes back and the car's gone?" Linda couldn't hide her glee. "This will be fair, Rachel. He's acted like a real—" "Don't finish that sentence." Rachel shook her head, looking at Rick, who was sleeping in his stroller. I don't want my son growing up in an atmosphere of anger and fighting. But I have to take care of us. If John can spend my money without considering my opinion, then I can sell a car that legally belongs to me. You're thinking right, Linda nodded. Let me call the dealership. I'll find out how quickly they can arrange the evaluation and buyout. While her friend was talking on the phone, Rachel gazed at the wedding photo of her and John, still on the shelf. Their happy, smiling faces. Who would have thought that 2 years later, she'd be planning revenge on the husband who had stolen her money? It hurt, and it felt wrong. But she saw no other way. It wasn't about saving the relationship anymore, it was about survival, for her and the baby. Everything is going well, Linda finished the call and turned to Rachel. They can look at the car today. If everything's in order with the documents and the car's condition, you could get the money tomorrow. The manager's name is Anthony. He's waiting for our call. Rachel took a deep breath, feeling a strange mix of determination and fear. What she was about to do was a radical step, a point of no return in her relationship with John. But hadn't he crossed that line first when he flew off to have fun with his mother on the money set aside for the child? All right, let's do this, she said firmly, pulling out her phone. I'll call the dealership. The sooner we get everything sorted, the better. As she dialed the number, Rachel thought about how this decision was not just an act of revenge. It was the first step toward her new, independent life. A life where she would make decisions and take responsibility for them. A life where her child's well-being would come first. And if starting that life meant selling the car of her unfaithful husband, so be it. The dealership was located on the outskirts of the city, a large, modern building with a spacious parking lot filled with cars of various makes and models. Rachel was nervous as she and Linda arrived in a taxi. She had to leave Rick with the neighbor, an elderly but energetic woman who had immediately empathized with the young mother's situation. Don't worry, Linda squeezed her friend's hand. Everything's legal. You have every right to sell this car. At the entrance, they were met by the manager, Anthony, a fit man in his mid-30s with a sharp gaze and a friendly smile. Good afternoon, Rachel, he shook her hand. I've been called about your Toyota. Do you have the documents with you? Rachel silently handed him the folder with the car's documents. Her hands were betraying her, trembling, and she was relieved that Linda was by her side. Her confidence gave Rachel strength. Let's see, Anthony began to examine the papers. Everything's in order, you're listed as the sole owner. Great. Is the car running? No major damage or technical issues. My husband regularly maintained it, Rachel replied, feeling a strange bitterness at the word husband. The last inspection was 3 months ago, before our son was born. All right, then let's move on to the car inspection, Anthony nodded toward the exit. Is the car here? No, Rachel hesitated. How could she explain that the car was parked in the yard of their house and the keys were on the shelf in the hallway? That her husband had no idea about her plans and was currently sunbathing on the beach with her maternity leave money? Linda came to the rescue. The car is parked near Rachel's house. We can drive there, and you can inspect it on site. No problem, Anthony agreed, taking out his phone. I'll call our technician. He'll check everything. We'll also handle the paperwork if you decide to sell it. An hour later, they were standing by the entrance to Rachel's building. The technician, a quiet man in his middle years, methodically examined the Toyota, checking the engine, suspension, and electronics. Rachel nervously shifted from foot to foot, glancing at the windows of the apartment, where her neighbor was sitting with Rick. Everything's in good condition, the technician finally announced, slamming the hood shut. For its age, the car is in excellent shape. Anthony nodded and turned to Rachel. "We're ready to make you an offer. Considering the car's condition and mileage, I can offer." He named an amount that exceeded Rachel's expectations. It was even more than John had spent on their vacation in Mexico with his mother. "Is this price acceptable to you?" Anthony asked, noticing her surprise. "Yes, that's fine," Rachel replied, glancing at Linda, who subtly nodded. "Great. Then let's head back to the dealership to finalize the paperwork. We can transfer the money to your account today, as soon as we finish all the formalities." In the dealership's office, Rachel signed the documents with a certain detached calmness. Just this morning, she had doubted if she was making the right decision, wondering if her revenge was too harsh. But now, looking at the figures in the sales contract, she felt only certainty in her choice. This money would provide for her and Rick for the next few months. They would be able to buy everything they needed, pay off the loan, and maybe even save a little for the future. "Congratulations on the successful deal." Anthony handed her a copy of the contract and the electronic receipt for the money transfer. "The funds should arrive in your account within the hour." "Thank you for your help," Rachel sincerely thanked him. At that moment, a notification about the funds being deposited arrived on her phone. Just like that, one signature, and she had money again to take care of herself and her child. After leaving the dealership, Rachel took a deep breath of the spring air. For the first time in many weeks, she felt something like freedom and hope. "So, do you feel lighter?" Linda asked when they got into the taxi. "Strange, but yes," Rachel admitted. "I thought I would feel guilty or angry, but instead, it's just relief. Like I've taken off a heavy backpack from my shoulders. Because I did the right thing." Linda squeezed her hand. "You protected yourself and your son. You didn't let yourself become a victim." On the way home, Rachel mentally mapped out her plan of action. First, pay off the loan for the refrigerator. Then, buy everything Rick needs. And also, find a good lawyer. Because now she knew for sure, after John's return, they would have a serious conversation. And she wanted to approach that conversation fully prepared. At home, after picking up Rick from the neighbor and putting him to bed, Rachel sat on the couch and, for the first time in a long time, felt a sense of calm. True happiness was still far off, but the peaceful certainty that she could handle any difficulties, even if she had to do it alone, had already arrived. Her phone vibrated. A message from John, another photo from the beach, where he was posing with a satisfied smile and a cocktail in his hand. The caption read, "The Paradise Vacation continues. How are you doing?" Rachel stared at the photo for a long time but felt neither anger nor resentment. Just a sad realization of how little this person meant to her now. She didn't reply. Instead, she opened the bank app and, looking at the substantial balance in her account, smiled for the first time in many days. "We're doing great," she whispered, looking at her sleeping son. "And it's going to get even better." The week passed unnoticed. Rachel made good use of her time. She paid off the loan, bought the necessary things for Rick, and set aside a significant amount in a separate account for a rainy day. Every day, she felt her confidence return, the confidence she had lost over months of suppression and manipulation from her husband and mother-in-law. The night before John's return, Rachel couldn't sleep. She imagined his reaction, prepared her speech, and thought through possible scenarios. Linda suggested she stay over at her place, fearing John's outburst of anger. But Rachel refused. She wasn't going to hide or run away. This was her apartment, her life, and she was determined to stand her ground and fight for her right to respect and dignity. The sound of the key in the lock came around noon. Rachel was sitting in the armchair with a book when the door swung open, and John and Miranda appeared on the doorstep, tanned and relaxed. Their smiles instantly disappeared when they saw Rachel sitting calmly. "Hello," she greeted dryly. "How was your vacation?" "Great." John tossed his bag onto the floor and looked around. "Where's the car?" "I didn't see it in the yard." Rachel set the book aside and looked directly into her husband's eyes. "I sold it." For a few seconds, there was absolute silence. John's face slowly changed. Confusion turned to understanding, then shock, and finally, fury. "What did you do?" he growled, stepping forward. "You sold the car?" "My car? It was in my name." Rachel spoke calmly, though her heart was pounding like crazy. "I needed the money. After all, someone spent my maternity leave on a vacation in Mexico." "How dare you?" John exploded. "That's my car. You had no right." "Legally, I did. The car was in my name, and I disposed of my property." Rachel stood up, instinctively straightening her back. "Just as you disposed of my money without asking permission." Miranda, who had been silent in shock until now, intervened. "John, she couldn't have. This is fraud. We need to call the police." "Go ahead," Rachel shrugged. "I'll provide the documents proving my ownership, and you can explain why you used maternity funds for fun, leaving the mother and child without means to live." John turned pale. He clearly hadn't expected such resistance from his wife, who had always given in to him before. You've destroyed our family," he muttered through clenched teeth. "No, John, you destroyed the family when you decided that your whims were more important than your son's well-being." Rachel's voice carried sadness, but no anger. "I simply protected myself and Rick. The way you should have been protecting us." "It's all your friend's fault," Miranda exclaimed. "I always said she'd cause you nothing but trouble, John. She never appreciated you." Rachel smiled calmly, even with a hint of pity. "You know, Miranda, I'm grateful to you. If it weren't for your influence on my son, I might have put up with the disrespect and neglect for a long time. You helped me see his true face and make the right decision." At that moment, Rick started crying. Rachel moved toward the crib, but John blocked her way. "We're not done talking yet. You'll pay me back for the car, every last cent." "No," Rachel answered firmly, looking him in the eye. "I won't return a single cent. That money will go toward the needs of your son, whom you seem to have completely forgotten about. Now, excuse me, I need to check on the baby." She bypassed her stunned husband and picked up the crying Rick. When she returned to the room, John was pacing back and forth, and Miranda sat on the couch with an expression of extreme indignation on her face. "I'm filing for divorce," Rachel said calmly, rocking her son. "And I'll be demanding child support. You can continue living however you want, John, without obligations and responsibility, but I will fight for my son. You can't treat me like this." John's voice held more confusion than anger. For the first time in their marriage, he faced a situation he couldn't control. "I can, and I will." Rachel looked at her mother-in-law. "You always wanted this, didn't you, Miranda? For your son to be only yours. Congratulations, you've got what you wanted. Let's go, John." Miranda stood up from the couch. "We have nothing to discuss with this wife of yours. We'll consult with a lawyer." "By all means," Rachel nodded. "And I will, too. In the meantime, I'd like to ask both of you to leave. Rick needs peace." When the door closed behind them, Rachel pressed her son to her chest and finally allowed herself to breathe. It had been hard, but she had made it. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like a victim, but like someone who was in control of their own fate. 6 months passed. The divorce case was nearing its conclusion, and the court had already set child support, which John was paying regularly, fearing issues at work. Rachel had found a remote job that she could balance with taking care of growing Rick. Miranda tried a few times to come over to talk about her grandson, but was met with a firm refusal. Rachel didn't want her son to soak up a toxic atmosphere from infancy. On the day Rachel received her divorce certificate, she bought a small cake and invited Linda to celebrate the occasion. "To your freedom and courage," her friend raised her cup of tea. Not everyone would have dared to take such a step. To a new life, Rachel smiled, watching Rick play on the carpet, and to the fact that sometimes a loss isn't the end, but the beginning of something better. She didn't feel any schadenfreude or vengeful satisfaction, only a calm confidence that she had done the right thing, protected herself and her child, and hadn't allowed herself to become a powerless victim of circumstances. And in that confidence, there was true strength. The strength of a woman who knows her worth and won't let anyone forget it. When Linda left, Rachel walked to the window. The spring sun illuminated the yard where children were playing. In a few years, Rick would be among them, a healthy, happy boy who would grow up with respect for himself and others. She would do everything in her power to ensure that. "We'll be fine," Rachel whispered, looking at her son. And for the first time in a long while, it wasn't just a consolation or hope, it was certainty. 5 years later. It was an unusually warm September day. Rachel adjusted the strap on her new bag and checked the time. They still had 10 minutes before the start of the solemn assembly. Rick was fidgeting, shifting from foot to foot, tugging at the collar of his white shirt. "Mom, I'm afraid I won't find my seat," he confessed, looking at the schoolyard filled with children and parents. "Don't worry," Rachel crouched down in front of him, adjusting his bow tie. "The teacher will show you where to sit, and I'll be nearby, over there with the other parents." Rick nodded, his face softening a little. In the 5 years since, he had transformed from a tiny, crying baby into a serious boy with thoughtful eyes and an insatiable curiosity about everything new. The first grade was an important milestone for both of them, a small but significant proof that they had made it. Rick, a familiar voice called, and Brittany, Linda's daughter, ran up to them with a huge bouquet of asters. "We've been looking for you everywhere." Behind Brittany, Linda smiled and embraced Rachel. "Are you nervous?" "A little," Rachel admitted. "It's the first time, after all." Linda nodded in understanding. Their friendship had only strengthened over the years. After the divorce, it was Linda who helped Rachel cope with the overwhelming difficulties. She supported her both emotionally and with practical advice. Now their children would go to the same school, to the same class. And it seemed to Rachel like a good sign. "Look, it seems they're organizing the children by classes," Linda pointed to the young teacher around whom the first graders were starting to gather. Rachel leaned down to her son. "We'll see each other after the assembly." "You'll be fine, my brave boy." Rick hugged her, sighed for courage, and ran off with Brittany toward his class. Rachel watched him go, feeling an unfamiliar lump in her throat. Her boy was growing up so fast. It seemed like just yesterday she was rocking him in her arms, not knowing what tomorrow would bring. "Do I feel it, or are your eyes a little misty?" Linda whispered, handing her a tissue. "It's just the wind," Rachel smiled, quickly wiping her eyes. "Let's go find a better spot so we can see everything." They settled in the shade of a spreading maple tree, with a good view of the area where the classes were lining up. Among the parents of the first graders, Rachel noticed a few familiar faces, moms from their kindergarten, neighbors from the building. Over the past 5 years, she had built new connections, created her own circle of friends where she was respected and valued. "By the way, I forgot to ask," Linda leaned closer to Rachel's ear. That manager from the IT company, the one you were seeing last summer, what's his name, Bruce? Shoo, Rachel replied, smiling involuntarily. Everything's good between us. He wanted to come today but flew out for a business trip last night. But he promised to bring Rick some special building blocks. So, it's serious? Linda raised her eyebrows meaningfully. Rachel just shrugged, but there was a warm sparkle in her eyes. After the divorce, she hadn't dared to start a new relationship for a long time. There were a few rare dates, usually ending in nothing. She was too afraid to make the same mistakes again. But Bruce, calm and reliable, with respectful regard for her past and serious intentions, gradually overcame her doubts. The formal assembly began, and Rachel focused on what was happening, scanning the crowd for Rick among the children. There he was, standing straight, listening attentively to the principal, occasionally exchanging glances with Brittany, looking so grown up and yet still so small. Behind her, a quiet female voice was heard. Look at Rachel, how she's blossomed. Remember, 5 years ago, we all thought she'd completely fall apart with a child on her hands. Of course, another voice replied. After a divorce like that, most people would have fallen apart, but she's doing great. She got back on her feet strong. Rachel pretended not to hear, but a warmth spread inside her. She had truly been through a lot in these years. After the divorce, it hadn't been easy. John paid child support regularly, but the amount wasn't very high. In the beginning, she worked remotely while Rick was asleep. Then, gradually, she expanded her client base and was able to earn enough to rent a small but cozy 2-room apartment. When Rick turned 3, she enrolled him in kindergarten and found a permanent job at a small accounting firm. Her boss turned out to be understanding, having raised 2 children on her own, and often allowed Rachel to work a flexible schedule when Rick was sick or there were other urgent matters. Over the years, her relationship with John had evolved from conflict to cold politeness. He visited his son twice a month, took him for weekends, and bought gifts for holidays. Miranda sometimes tried to interfere, but Rachel firmly put an end to any attempts at manipulation. John remarried 2 years ago, and his new wife, whom Rachel had met only a couple of times, seemed like a decent person. At least, she treated Rick warmly. The assembly was nearing its end. The first graders took turns coming up and reciting poems, and then the first bell rang, sounded by a little first grader sitting on the shoulder of a high school student. Rick, along with his class, solemnly marched into the school building, and Rachel waved him goodbye, feeling a strange mix of pride and a little sadness. The first graders are having an introductory lesson, and we can have some coffee in the meantime, Linda suggested, as the area in front of the school started to empty. I still have half an hour before my client meeting. They settled in a small cafe across the street from the school. Rachel ordered a latte and gazed thoughtfully at the school building through the window. What are you thinking about? Linda asked, stirring sugar into her cappuccino. About how much has changed in these 5 years, Rachel smiled. Remember how we were sitting in my kitchen back then, planning to sell the car? I was in complete despair, not knowing what would happen next. At least now everything is great for you, Linda took Rachel's hand. You have your own place on the way, a job, a wonderful son, and a promising man on the horizon. By the way, when will you introduce Bruce to Rick? We've already met, Rachel said quietly. Last week we went to an amusement park together. Rick spent the whole evening telling me how cool Bruce is because he's not afraid of roller coasters. Linda laughed. The highest mark of approval from a 5-year-old expert. 6-year-old, Rachel corrected her. He reminds me every day that he's already 6, not 5. They finished their coffee and headed back to the school. Rachel walked slowly, savoring the moment, the warm September day, the pleasant tiredness after the excitement, the feeling of duty well done. 5 years ago, when she made the decision to stand up for herself and her child, she couldn't have imagined how much would change. Rachel couldn't help but think of her former mother-in-law, Miranda. After the divorce, she had tried several times to turn Rick against his mother, but quickly realized it was useless. Now, meeting her grandson every few months, she was outwardly polite to Rachel, though the dislike still showed in her eyes. Well, some things never change. And here come our first graders, Linda exclaimed, pointing to the children coming out of the school. Rick was running toward his mom, waving a bright notebook. Mom, we got homework to draw our family. I'll draw you and me, and Marley, he said, bouncing with excitement. Can I draw Bruce too? He comes over to our place a lot now. Rachel hesitated for a moment, then squatted down and hugged her son. Of course you can. Draw whoever you consider part of your family. They said goodbye to Linda and Brittany and headed home. Rachel had taken the day off to spend this important day with her son. On the way, Rick chatted nonstop about school, new friends, and his teacher. And Rachel listened, thinking about how unexpectedly life unfolds. That day, 5 years ago, when she made the desperate decision to sell her husband's car, had been a turning point in her life. It was the first time she believed in her own strength, the first time she put her child's well-being above immediate comfort. And now, looking at her happy, healthy Rick, she knew it was all worth it. In the evening, after putting her son to bed, Rachel went out onto the balcony with a cup of tea. Her phone vibrated. A message from Bruce. How was the first day of school? Rick is happy. I'm flying in tomorrow. I'll bring the promised gift. Missing both of you. Rachel smiled and sent a picture of Rick in his school uniform, holding a bouquet and smiling happily. Then she added, he's going to draw you in his first homework, his family portrait. We miss you too. Looking at the lights of the evening city, she thought about how life, despite all its trials, was surprisingly fair. Those who had betrayed her in difficult times were now on the periphery of her life, and those who supported her had become truly close. She herself, having gone through betrayal and despair, had become stronger and wiser. Rachel closed her eyes and took a deep breath of the evening air. So much lay ahead. Rick's first academic achievements, the development of her relationship with Bruce, new professional challenges. And she was ready for it all because she knew she could handle any difficulty now. Most importantly, she had learned to stand up for her rights and protect those she loved. The lesson had cost her dearly, but it was worth it.